Behold, it's Natalia. Let's go find some monkeys, shall we?
Would you say sex is like riding a bicycle?
Nothing gets me going like Christmas and wigs. Let's check out this show.
I remember the first creature I beheld. He was a squirrel. His name was Kevin.
I heard you need a DNA sample.
I want to find light and joy in things that bring us together and unite us. And I think science is something that can unite us. Ow. God damn.
There's a world out there, a world that needs to be beheld.
Behold, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Survival of the Filthiest. I'm your host, Natalia Reagan. I'm a biological anthropologist and comedian. And I started this show because, honestly, folks, what the futz is happening in this country? We have a war on science, healthcare, DEI, people of color, gays, bays, jetways, veterans, queers, engineers, the vax, paperbacks, teachers, creatures, women, and the queer community. Especially trans, non-binary, and well, folks, now they're attacking science education. Well, they've been attacking science education for years. We're going to get to that in a minute. But so what better way than to resist than talk to scientists, activists, educators about the good trouble they're creating to move this country forward rather than 5,786 steps backwards. And here's a quick reminder that if you like this, you can like it, you can subscribe, you can share. And if you want to help contribute to the production of the show, because we're trying to turn it into a podcast and clip it up more, you can join my Patreon. I would very much appreciate it. And I can keep the lights on. And today we're going to be talking about the war on science education here in the United States. Every year, new anti-science bills and resolutions are introduced in nearly every state in this country. And this ranges from anti-evolution, anti-climate change, including intelligent design in science classrooms. According to a 2024 paper published in Science Education, the total number of anti-science education state legislation efforts increased from 2003 to 2023, as did the number of passed bills and resolutions. So we got to stay diligent. Complacency is the antithesis to progress. And this trend is frightening because it will keep US students in the dark about evolution, climate change, and the ability to understand the world around them. And it is equally frightening as this is the 100th anniversary of the Scopes monkey trial and the 20th anniversary of the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial, aka the Dover panda trial. We'll get to that in a second. I just love that pandas were involved. Quickly, let's just talk a little bit about the Scopes monkey trial. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. Hold on one second. This is a little sneak peek of your guest. You get the amazing Amanda Townley, but more on that in a second. So let's just talk about the Scopes monkey trial. Essentially, a 24-year-old Dayton, Tennessee high school football coach and science and math teacher named John Scopes was accused of violating the newly passed Butler Act that says teaching evolution in the state of Tennessee is against the law. He was charged and arrested and put on trial for his offenses, which was somewhat questionable because he didn't actually teach biology. He oftentimes substituted it, but he was willing to take that fall. And what happened was 3 times, hold on, let me get to the next slide. There we go. That's the Anti-Evolution League. Oh, goodness gracious. And we still have signs like that going around. But essentially, 2 big lawyers came in to defend the 2 different, the plaintiff and the defendant. 3-time presidential nominee William Jennings Bryan, who is seen here on the right, was basically defending or the prosecutor, and the esteemed attorney Clarence Darrow, who represented Leopold and Loeb in the infamous 1924 murder trial, was basically defending John Scopes. And basically the ACLU funded the defense. So he was taking care of it. They were taking care of it. The Scopes monkey trial was called that by journalists because, of course, when we think of evolution, we often hear, I didn't come from monkeys. And that's not necessarily what this is about, folks. So the trial was in July 1924. And the, hold on, let me get to the next. There you go. There's the Scopes trial. And essentially Scopes was found guilty, but not before Darrow and his defense team poked massive gaping holes in William Jennings Bryan's prosecution. And so this was the unraveling of creationism being taught in classrooms. So even though it was a loss for Scopes at the time, which was overturned 2 years later, it still was the beginning of the unraveling of creationism being taught in the classrooms. Scopes did have to pay a $100 fine, but again, it was overturned. And the Butler Act remained on the books until 1967 when it was overturned. So let's cut to, oh, and by the way, these are some of the things that were inspired by that trial: multiple books and a famous play called Inherit the Wind, which became the very famous movie, which featured a chimpanzee smoking a cigarette like one does. And makes me so happy that chimps are no longer used in the film industry. Thank goodness for Andy Serkis and CGI. But you have Gene Kelly and Spencer Tracy playing the defense, playing Clarence Darrow, and shaking the hand of the chimpanzee. And when they do meet the chimpanzee, they say, "Hello, Grandpa." Tip of the hat that this was our ancestor. And some of the signs are great in the movie: Doomsday for Darwin, godliness, not gorillas. That was a personal favorite. But fast forward to 2005 and the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial. This case was in Pennsylvania, and essentially officials wanted to include creationism as an alternative to evolution taught in classrooms. And parents of students did not like this. They wanted their students to get a real education, a real science education. And the book that was introduced at the time was called Of Pandas and People. So that's why it's called the Dover Panda Trial sometimes. Let the pandemonium ensue, folks. And fortunately, we had a judge that ruled that creationism is not science and should not be in the classroom. But it was with the help of the National Center of Science Education. The president of the time, their executive director at the time, Eugenie Scott, helped basically put together the legal team that represented the plaintiffs, and also had experts like Ken Miller, who is the president of the board of directors now at the National Center of Science Education. And it was a roaring success. However, we're still dealing with a bunch of pushback and anti-science bills. So today, I'm very, very, very excited to, be talking to the new executive director. Well, she's not new anymore. It's been over a year, of the National Center of Science Education, Dr. Amanda Townley. She's not only a very good friend, she's also an extraordinary science communicator. She's an evolutionary biologist. And I've said this before, I've watched her go toe-to-toe with creationists in a New York bar and eviscerate their argument, but in the kindest, most gentlest way. She is an excellent, ideal informant, essentially. She can really speak to people and get to their level, right? And understand and have that radical empathy, which we talked about last time she was on. So let me just give a little bio. Amanda L. Townley specializes in science teacher education, evolution education research, and science literacy focused public outreach, alternating her time between the classroom and the field as an associate professor. Oh, this is a little bit older, I think. This is a little bit older. Oops. Let's fast forward. So essentially, Dr. Amanda Townley. Sorry, I think I pulled this from a different page. Excuse me. She's now running as the executive director at the National Center of Science Education. She has served as an expert panelist for Science Friday Education, focusing on Teach the E, E being evolution, and works with organizations including the Smithsonian Human Origins Program and the National Geographic funded Suka Project at the Cradle of Humankind in South Africa. Her research has been referenced in mainstream media outlets such as Scientific American, Forbes, and Newsweek, and can be found in scholarly journals such as Science Education, the American Biology Teacher Education Sciences, and International Journal of Mathematics and Science Education, and others. And she is just absolutely fabulous. We had her on last time, and everybody commented, can she just be on every week? Because she's amazing. So folks, people of the internet, please help me introduce Dr. Amanda L. Townley. Welcome. Welcome.
Hi, Natalia. It's always great to be back. And boy, is that a mouthful. Wow.
Well, I'm sorry. I realized, I was like, as I was reading it, I was like, oh no, I put in the wrong.
Oh, it's okay. It's so not a big deal. I've done many things and worn many hats. And so just excited to be a part of NCSE and continuing to fight the good fight as the battles increase on the daily and the war wages on for science literacy.
Yeah. So right now, we had you on in February. You were on Darwin Day, which was fantastic. But I want to know what is currently happening in our country and what bills are you really focusing with NCSE? I mean, there's so many. I mean, is there even a number right now that you can give us?
So it's really fascinating. So a lot of people are probably familiar with Glenn Branch. He is a one-man machine when it comes to staying really on top of all of the things that are going on in legislation across the country. So federal down to state level, even sometimes at the local level. And we were really anticipating a very heavy increase in legislative pieces this year. And fascinatingly enough, we haven't seen as much of an increase as we anticipated, but we're seeing some very interesting moves. So, for example, one of the big things that we had early in the year came out of North Dakota. So, State Bill 2355 out of North Dakota was remarkable because it came out with clear intent and actually utilized the words intelligent design in the bill. And so this is not something we traditionally see. I mean, people are probably familiar with bills that we were following on the East Coast last year, where there was an argument ongoing about the intent of a bill to even potentially focus on intelligent design. But the bill ended up not having the wording in it, although the senator that was backing that bill expressed that that was what they were hoping for. But this was a very bold move on the part of the North Dakota Senate to actually say this is a bill requiring the teaching of intelligent design in science classrooms. And so it didn't get approved in committee, because usually these things die in committee because of the fear of that legal cost. I mean, that's something that, you know, very frequently comes up about Kitzmiller versus Dover, is the fact that it cost, you know, over $1 million for that case to go to trial only to lose. And so a lot of times we see that the Senates and Houses don't want to press their luck. And so those things die in committee. They frequently come up, but they usually die in committee. But because of the particulars of North Dakota, even if a bill dies in committee, it still goes to the floor. And frighteningly, this bill only was defeated by 3 votes.
Wow.
So it was a 22 to 25 margin. So, you know, that's a pretty stark contrast to that 2023 bill that was originally introduced in West Virginia and reintroduced minus the intelligent design. That one really just prohibited any penalties for teachers who responded to questions. This one outright said intelligent design. Then we have what's really happening this year is a little more subtle, so to speak. So rather than things coming out in legislation, we're seeing things happening at either the impact level from the departments of education, which are a little quieter generally than legislative pieces, and even at the local level. So something of a huge concern to us that we also monitor is the standards adoptions processes for every state. So just to give a quick primer on how that works, right? Most people have heard of the next generation science standards if you're in the sciences. It's tied to the K-12 frameworks for science ed, very similar to vision and change that we've all heard about in dealing with things like NSF. But we don't really have national standards that are implemented across the country. All of the states have the authority to create their own standards. A fraction of states actually utilize the NGSS in their true form. Others align their own standards to the K-12 frameworks. So there's a little bit of continuity, but it's not a blanket, right? And every state has different timelines for when they renew standards. So we watch these things very carefully as proposed standards come out. And one of the cases that we have just recently, a test that we've both most recently been looking at is changing of language in standards. So we're seeing attempts now to re-soften the language. People that have heard me talk hear me say, I'm a Bama girl. You may not hear it right now. Get me excited, get me mad. You're going to hear that full lower Appalachia come out full force. But we didn't have the word evolution in our standards until 2016. Okay. So things like using the terms unity, biodiversity, all of those things were there, but the E word is specifically left out for a purpose. Now, that's been going to the wayside. I mean, again, even Alabama and other states that have traditionally been very anti-evolution have the E word or have evolution, have some kind of coverage in there. Well, we're starting to see attempts to soften that because of the tenor coming out of the federal language and processes and things being cut from funding. So it does have a trickle down effect, but it's interesting because it's a self-imposed penalty in a lot of ways, where departments of education are not wanting to run afoul of the narrative coming from the federal level. And so now we're seeing a re-softening of that language, where very much like in Florida, where attempts were made to remove climate change, not only from all the legislative pieces and conversations, but you can go back and look. They tried to remove the words climate change from their textbooks very quietly. So these are the kind of battles we're facing very strongly. And it really goes from a local level to a state level. So we had this happen in a district in Texas. We've had this happen in Florida. We've had this happen in Iowa and a number of other states. And it's really a difficult place for people to be. So on the one hand, we want strong standards, and we're going to fight for strong standards. On the other hand, that radical empathy hat, you have to recognize that in some of these cases, the reasons why leadership are softening the words is to preserve even having a standard. And that's scary to me. The fact that people are having to backtrack and back channel in order to maintain the standard, because the risk is either we soften this for digestion for the people that don't like it, or they're going to cut it out completely.
Oh my God. That's so, I mean, it reminds me of negotiating. I don't want to negotiating with terrorists, essentially, making sure, really having to tiptoe just to make sure that it's not, cut out completely, almost dealing with like an abusive partner or something, where you're just like, how can we negotiate, but I can still survive.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Wow.
And it's so easy to vilify and be like, why did you do that? You're in this position. But in reality, that person is getting beat up from every side of the conversation because they're automatically vilified. And yes, some are doing it intentionally to weaken standards. And then there are also some really good people out there that are trying to fight to preserve everything that they can. So, it's something where let's show up and show out. People ask me, well, what can I do? When your state's adopting standards, get a copy of them. They will send that information out. If you don't know when they're coming out, call me, email me, reach out to NCSE, and we'll tell you. We are even there to provide talking points for people who want to show up when they have those open forums from the community, because it does no good for me to go and yell and scream at people. People in that state need to mount up, show up, and speak out for science education. And we're a tremendous tool to do that, and happy to do that. But we have to have that help on the ground, because it really is coming from everywhere. We get calls and emails from teachers, from people in the media, from members of school boards, from people at the state level, you name it. When they need help, they reach out, and we'll do everything that we can to help them. But it's really interesting to see how things have shifted over time. Have to get the evolution joke in, right?
Yes.
How things are changing over time from, early on trying to ban the teaching of evolution, and then trying to, balance things out. And then we tried to blunt the teaching. So we see these waves, right? So Scopes was banning it. Epperson came and overturned the teaching of creationism. So then we get the balancing, where we're going to have, okay, well, now we're going to invent intelligent design to fill that niche, right? And, we're seeing this roll and roll and roll. And now, so we've gone from banning to balancing to blunting. Now we're calling it backsliding.
Yes.
So we've got our 4Bs because we're really going back in time.
And the 4Bs really equal the E. I mean, it's just evolution of,
Absolutely. And, with the lemon test being thrown out, with the state of the courts right now, people are really emboldened in a way that we haven't seen in a long time, because we really don't know if this goes before the court, whether they're going to hear it or not hear it, because often they would dismiss it on precedent. And so there's this door that's sitting there kind of partially open, and people are pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to see how far they can go. So we need support. We need voices. We need activism for science and science education now more than we ever have.
Absolutely. I feel like this is the same with democracy is, democracy dies in complacency is if you're not willing to keep fighting and keep fighting and
Right.
keep fighting. And the progress, this is more of a, sort of a deeper question, but in your opinion, why do you think people are so hell bent on keeping evolution out of the classrooms? Why do you think intelligent design is what people want to see taught?
People are afraid. So much conflict ties back to a very simple concept. We're human beings, and a long time ago, we discovered if we sit around a fire together, we're more likely to survive, and it puts a light on the darkness, right? And so when people don't understand, when people don't know, it's the human condition to try to explain that the best we can. We have various ways of knowing that contribute to our understanding. Science being one of those, religiosity being one of those, cultural traditions, philosophy, so many different ways that we as human beings try to make sense of the world. When we don't understand something, when we fear something, or in the case of my upbringing in a very literalist creationist family, fear was the driver because it was, if you question the Bible, you're going to go to hell. So if I'm going to teach this in a classroom and my students are going to question their faith, now they're all going to hell and so am I. It's all driven really by fear. And a lot of people are afraid to listen and afraid to learn. And there's so many intermingling factors. The level of distrust that we have, that society has in a lot of ways of science and scientists. And it's really boiled down to the basis of not understanding what science is and what science is not, and therefore being afraid that it's somehow coming for their way of life or somehow trying to completely disenfranchise their cultural practices or beliefs. And it's really to a point that, it's critical mass and it's very scary. And we hear very often about, well, people aren't listening to authority. I'm an authority. I have a doctorate. I've done the research. But it brings me to a point that Marshall Shepard was discussing not too long ago. He and I discussed it, and he also wrote a Forbes piece about it. And it's this idea of the negative impact of hubris on science as a field. And I don't say that lightly. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing to get into a research space. There's a lot of work that goes into conducting good research. And it does, in the essence of the field, make someone an authority. However, when it comes to the general public, we as scientists, we as in the academy, right, in terms of, academia, have long neglected the fact that you can't separate the ivory and separate things into our ivory tower of great research and the public. And a lot of that we see now is coming to bear. It started really heavily in COVID and persists even now, because for so long we penalized science communicators. We penalized people for taking the things they were learning in the lab, in the field, the theoretical work, the practical work. They were penalized for communicating that to the public, for trying to communicate that and work with teachers. How many tenure portfolios included space for, outreach on social media and things like that. And now we have this beautiful community that used to exist in these spaces that has been forced out of those spaces. And now is when we need the ability to connect to people more than ever. We need our research to be not just for other scholars. We need the work that we do to be for the public, for public consumption in public spaces, for teachers in practical spaces so that they can show students what it looks like, feels like, and is to be a scientist. And it's very, very scary that we're in the position we are now. But I think now more than ever, we have that tangible support for the fact that science communication is so critical. And not just from formal spaces, not just big fancy talks in public venues, pub talks, science on tap, comedy shows, podcasts. webinars, all of these things. And people say, well, who's going to be the voice? Everyone. If people fall in love with your story, they listen. When people listen, they learn. When they learn, they become invested. And when they become invested, they fight back.
See, this is the Amanda Townley curriculum, right? No, but this is 100% true. I mean, again, like facts and stats don't change hearts and minds. It's storytelling and laughter. I will always credit, because I think credit is due to Julie Lesnick, who wrote Eating Insects, who I remember I interviewed her because I was doing a poster about, making biological anthropology humorous, spelled like humorous, the bone. And she said, laughter is a great sort of barometer to know that maybe your students are laughing because they're just like, oh my God, she's so whatever, but they're listening. They are listening, right? And that's how you keep your audience engaged. And so when people dismiss these different forms of science communication, whether it's pub talks or comedy or whatever, right? And I remember actually I'm listening and reading to Donald Prothero's book about climate discoveries, and he talks about the Carl Sagan effect and how Carl Sagan wasn't respected. Carl Sagan wasn't respected by other researchers in his field because he was a public science communicator. I mean, he is the quintessential, but he even dealt with this. And so I agree that this is a time when, if anything, being a science communicator and should be a huge plus for, getting tenure or being hired or whatever,
or just existing anywhere with a love for science.
Yes.
I tell people, I said, you don't want to talk to the public. You don't want to reward people for engaging with the public and with educators, which means students, thousands of students per educator over a career. Yeah. I said, but what percentage of the population is scientists? And how many people vote? We're not the majority. And so if we're not communicating clearly, I see a lot with all what's happening at our agencies and NSF. It's horrifying to see the directorates wiped out, to see all of these people, even mid-project or at the end of a project or even the beginning of a project, losing their funding, career grants gone, all of these things. And, I think on that, and I think, most of the public has no idea how any of that works. None of these things are transparent enough for the general public, the voting public who would have our backs. It hasn't been transparent enough. And I think if we don't learn anything else out of what's happening, the need for transparency, the need for that public connection, the need for people to truly understand just how much of what happens from those research grants is impacting their life, is a critical, absolutely critical lesson for all of us. With the different spaces and opportunities that we have where we can engage, and we're told, oh, well, don't, that will be frowned on, or, it's time to let that go. It's time for a new model of what good science looks like in terms of, when you're thinking about a career. Because, I remember when I was a professor, writing in my review packet for tenure and promotion, a specific argument for the fact that I had all of these very bizarro, rotating curatorship on Twitter. They're like, what? This was a decade ago. Right. Yeah. And having to explain, there's research, scholarly research, there's research to practice. How do you translate that so it's usable by other people and helps to inspire the next generation through education? And then there's research to the public. Can you communicate what you do in a 3-minute elevator talk to a 5th grader? People would laugh about that. And I'm like, no, that's really critical. It's critical. Absolutely. You must.
Yeah, I remember it was about 10 years ago that there were a lot of politicians that kept saying, I'm not a scientist, but I'm not a scientist, but. And I remember Todd Disotell and I, when we were still doing Talking Shit with Dr. Todd and Natalia, we did an episode, like, hey, there are a lot of scientists that would love to talk to you and would love to boil down points, because, a lot of the decisions being made, whether it's even like what's happening at the Smithsonian, and even challenging this idea that race is a biological concept. Like, we scientists have known forever that it's not a biological concept. It's
Right.
been used that way to promote things like, the American eugenics movement, and we should move
Right.
away from that. But,
Mhm.
even just this idea that sex is, determined at conception, which we know
Mhm.
to be completely untrue. So
Mhm.
it's just, it's clear that politicians, but also, even folks, it worries me when we see educators or people that
Mhm.
are in, sort of positions to determine how education is going to go, that have
Right.
very little understanding of science itself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, so this is why more than ever I'm very happy that, I skipped a portion of what I was saying about the National Center of Science Education. I mean, you guys started in 1982, a
Mhm.
nonprofit that has spent over 40 years trying to make sure that science is alive and well in the classrooms,
Yes.
so I just want to thank you, because that's, this, we're going to die in the darkness of ignorance if we don't have that happen. Because I think one of the things that we forget is the soft power that science education holds.
Right.
That if we remain intellectual powerhouse
Mhm.
internationally, we're going to continue to have that soft power. And I mean, can you speak a little bit about what's happening with, NIH and NSF in terms of grants being gutted and terminated?
I mean, the impact is going to have a ripple effect for decades. Decades, even if it stops right now. And, it's hard to comment on because every day I see, dear friends from across fields all over, not just the sciences either, the sciences, the humanities, everyone is getting lambasted with these cuts. And, being on the inside of that and understanding the labor of love that is even creating a project worth taking the time to write those proposals, and then the small percentages to be able to get that funding, and then the impacts that they have to so many people. The impact on communities that are already marginalized is going to be just exponentially horrible. And beyond those sentiments and just the fear of what that's going to do for everything from medicine to farming to technology. I mean, coupling that with the removal of all the data from the websites, I it's one of the few things that I think can actually pretty much render me speechless when I start focusing on it. And that says a lot if you know me.
I do know you, and that does speak volumes quietly. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's, I mean, that has been, I think, my biggest concern is I've had friends in the medical fields that have lost, K grants for
Mhm.
long COVID, something that is
Yeah.
going to be a problem for decades to come. It's not over yet. I mean, we're facing pandemics that are potentially preventable, and we have
Mhm.
somebody heading up our health department who bathes in sewer water. Uh, I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
He was hanging out in some pools in Washington that have sewage runoff, and RFK took his family there. So, we have him, saying that basically single-handedly causing a measles
Mhm.
outbreak in Samoa, running our
Mhm.
health department. I mean, what do you say to people that, I mean, I guess I've seen you go toe to toe with people, especially creationists, but when you've got somebody like, say, an anti-vaxxer, like, just if somebody is watching and has somebody in their family and they're the ideal informant, which I brought up briefly, but this idea of an ideal informant is essentially people are most likely to listen to people that are like them,
Mhm.
right? This is why, even though it's uncomfortable to talk to any of your family members that might be anti-science or, God forbid, racist, it's good to have that conversation,
Mhm.
as uncomfortable it is, because you might actually get through. But when it comes to things like anti-vaxxers, do you have maybe a basic script to work with that people could take a note from?
I think for any conversations like that, whether it's anti-vax, anti-evolution, anti-climate change, it's the it's the easiest script ever. Why? It's more about my mindset when I'm having those conversations with people, and it's genuinely from a place where I'm not coming at them with an argument. I'm not coming at them. I'm setting aside judgment. I'm not coming at them with evidence. I literally am coming at them with the curiosity of a scientist to try to understand, why do you feel that way? And hearing that story, not only does that help you gauge where people are in terms of that spectrum of willing to listen, But even engaging in that space and stopping and listening and saying, well, I'm a scientist, but I'd really like to know, why do you feel that way? What has led you to believe that way? And sometimes the best thing you can do is get that whole story, thank them for that story, and walk away, which sounds a little bit unusual, right? But you've created a humanized version of science for that person. And a lot of times there are weird experiences that underlie that. There are stories of scientists doing tests on people. There are historically accurate stories of science doing horrible things to whole groups of people that drive fear. There may be terrible experiences with doctors. You never know. But sometimes the gateway drug, so to speak, to curiosity and being willing to learn is just having someone from that who can humanize that field and has a genuine, non-judgmental interest. It's not about running in with your flaming torch and bludgeoning that person with it, even if you want to do that. And it really does take a lot of patience and a lot of practice and a lot of reserve, because sometimes it's a really hard pill to swallow to not pass judgment or to not speak and start throwing in evidence. Sometimes in those conversations, they do ask questions and they want to know. But by not being pushy about it, you can open a lot of discourse. And I think, going back to science communication, that's why it's so important that all of us doing science are communicating what we do, even if it's small within our communities, even if it's when we go to an event or we're out with friends or whatever. John Marks asked a great question. He said, are there influencers in science? Well, yes, there are absolutely influencers, but it's kind of fascinating the way the algorithms work for what makes someone a great influencer. And sometimes there are people that appear to be really good science influencers, but they're not quite accurate. So rather than, to me, focusing on just specifically influencers, other than amplify the good ones, is if everyone is communicating, we're normalizing science as a part of our daily lives. We're normalizing the stories and the backgrounds and the cultures and the rich diversity of the people that are in scientific positions and the things that can be studied and explored in a way that demystifies it. So for me, that's the first step. And then the influencer piece kind of comes based on, that algorithm and what people think is, to quote my kids, and they're going to hate me for this, what is and is not cringe.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Cringe is a thing, No, I mean, I know that there have been some folks that have taken on science and got it a little off,
Mhm.
and I've corrected, or other people have corrected, but tried in the best way to correct it
Right.
without being cruel, right? Because there's
Yeah.
a way to do it without, and in fact, I had this really interesting exchange. It was about the Smithsonian takeover and I can't even remember her name, the new woman in charge of
Mm.
the Smithsonian, and somebody commented about race being a biological concept and that it's not. And somebody wrote, like, for real, like, is that
What?
that's
Yeah.
not real. And
Yeah.
I wrote a response, and the person, and it was a, kind of like, oh, actually, this is, it's a social construct. We can't really draw a
Mhm.
line between the groups, basically broke it down for them. And they were like, wow, thank you so much. I learned something. And I was like, what was this
Yeah.
interaction? And then somebody, because I made also, a comment that humans have less genetic diversity than many other species,
Mhm.
like chimpanzees. And someone asked, what do you mean by species? And it was just this really lovely back
Right.
and forth with people that I never anticipated. So I really think that even though I was raised up on YouTube, I've had a YouTube channel for almost 19 years, which is ridiculous. I was taught not to read the comments, but sometimes the comments
Yeah.
you can actually, like, and just to your point, ask why.
Mhm.
Where did you hear that? And just ask the question, and with from a place of pure curiosity rather than contempt, really
Yeah.
can keep the door open rather than
Right.
slamming it shut.
Yes.
I want to also say thank you, Jonathan Marks. Congratulations on your retirement. Uh,
Yes.
and
Enjoy.
buy his books. What does it mean to be 98% chimpanzee, among others? Why are there still creationists? I'm just giving a shout out because I always will. And I also want to give a shout out to My Unfinished Journey. Hail Natalia and the National Center for Science Education. Also hail Dr. Amanda Townley, because I'm going to be a lady for a moment. Actually, I'm going to be a human, because anybody would say this. You look marvelous. Your hair is
Thank
divine.
you.
And your nails. This is just, I have to point these things out. But I really love your way.
These are my warning. This is my evolutionary warning. The bright nails and the big hair lets you know what's coming.
Exactly. Oh my God. See, they say, a lot of times in birds, the males are the brightest and most colorful. Not necessarily, like I feel like the female here you've got your colorful, the clacks though. Do you clack? Do you do I had a Southern, actually, it was a Southern algebra teacher, Mrs. Dieter, and she would clack. She would sit there and do this with her acrylic nails. And this is like the early 90s. And I'll never forget her. And she had hair. It was the early 90s. So it was curly and beautiful and big, but it was like it had its own zip code kind of big. You know what I mean? Like, and
oh yes. Oh yes. Very, very much so. Very much so. But
so
I mean,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, of all the bills and resolutions that you're seeing, what is there one out there that has really knocked your socks off that you're like, I did not see? I mean, I know you mentioned the intelligent design part, but was there another one that just really kind of was like, whoa, okay.
That's really the one that got us, just because it was so bold. Right now we're looking at whether or not SCOTUS is going to open that door for opt-out. That's the big thing. Really keeping an eye on the courts. I think a lot of the states right now, in terms of legislation, are still kind of maintaining a little bit of the status quo, as it were, with some of these things being introduced but dying on the floor in committee. But it's really that self-imposed kind of penalization that's happening, that self-imposed change that's happening at the state level with the departments of ed or with individual districts trying to do things, because those can be a lot harder to fight. You have to have somebody willing who has legal standing to fight back. That's the whole reason Alabama to this day has a disclaimer in their science textbooks about evolution, despite Cobb shutting that down in Georgia a long time ago. Because if you don't have someone in Alabama who's willing to, and who has the standing to raise the case, then it persists. So it's a lot harder to fight back on those local levels unless people are willing to kind of rise up and fight. And that's, again, why this science communication piece is so critical. And I love it. And I have to tie it back to a conversation I had with a group of students and then in a public talk at SUNY New Paltz. So shout out to Glenn Gare and the EVOS program up there doing incredible things. And the question I asked was, what can a trial from 100 years ago teach us about addressing skepticism in the public in the modern era? And I was telling them there are really three things that we learned from Scopes, because even Scopes, people have these misconceptions that this poor teacher was like drug kicking and screaming out of his classroom and berated and all these things. And what they don't realize is that John Scopes, Dayton, Tennessee, all of those things were perfectly choreographed to make the biggest possible splash. And so the three lessons that we have are, number one, know your audience. Where are you? Who are you speaking with? What can you learn from them? And how can you utilize that to motivate, engage, empower, and teach them in a way that makes them more curious and more interested in discourse, right? Number two, leverage your venue, right? So they could have had that trial anywhere in Tennessee, giant cities, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga. They picked a small town because it was going to make the biggest splash. And they literally created a SciComm explosion 100 years ago. It was in every newspaper around the country, even around the globe, right? And so even though they lost, sometimes a loss, number three, can be a win.
Yeah.
Because it's amplifying. And I think I preach this all the time, and I do get excited. So I'm going to own it and say, yeah, I preach it. And that's the fact that we've got to stop going at things as if it's a war against culture, against religion. It's not. It's a war for science. And when you frame it that way, you realize that sometimes the battle is not about getting someone who just met you or who you've been engaging with to magically, pardon the term, a teacher of mine in college always used to say, osmosis is not a thing. You can't sit on yours and just absorb knowledge. I will never forget that for as long as I live.
I wouldn't. That's
I know.
brilliant.
But it's all about realizing that sometimes the goal is not to win, it's to open the door. We're not playing checkers here. We're playing chess. This is a long game. And so if you go into that scenario or situation and you yell and scream, or you lose your cool, or you pass judgment, or you just beat people up with a giant stick of evidence, right? In the long term, that person's not going to be more willing to learn more and engage or expand or be open-minded. It closes doors. So chess, not checkers. You got to play that long game.
No, I think that's great. And also it's not a binary. I mean, it's
No.
not a win or a lose. I think there's so many gradients in between where it's like,
Absolutely.
making some strides here, maybe losing some ground
Yeah.
there, but keep going. And,
Yeah.
I do like the idea in terms of activism and the fight, the war being problematic, because it really does pit two sides against each other.
Yes.
And I struggle with that myself, because I'll get so mad about, whether it's,
Mhm.
pro-life versus pro-choice or
Yes.
anti-vax, or, and I get so, but at the same time, I realize that when you approach something like that with a
Mhm.
fighting mentality, it's going to get ugly. It doesn't have to be that way. And I think that goes with so many different parts of our life, right? I mean, I don't have kids, but I know that it's
So
probably
many.
a constant battle. And again, we use the word battle, but it's a constant maybe struggle to deal with, even like, negotiating with your kids, or
Mhm.
just anything in your life. So I guess, yeah,
Yeah.
reframing it as, I mean,
But even with that, we pick our
challenge.
battles, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
pick how we approach things. We don't escalate everything from 0 to 100. There are sometimes, there are times when that's absolutely appropriate, right? I'm not saying that's not. But a majority of the interactions are not that serious. They're serious in terms of the impact, but the way we engage should be a lot less intense and more from a listening and development of relationships. Perceptions are changeable. We know that. That's even research based. Perceptions are changeable, but it takes time because you're literally talking about somebody's worldview. So that involves gaining trust, building relationships, starting with connecting conversations, building rapport. And absolutely, community is where change begins. So going back to the communities we're a part of, even if we've become separated from those over time. I mean, everybody's heard me talk about growing up in a very rural place in Alabama, in a Southern Baptist ministry family. Because of that, I have a level of understanding of what goes on in those communities that allows me to be a bridge between the world of science and their world of faith. And I think very often we overlook just how powerful those things can be to help bridge understandings. And I mean, again, it applies to so much more than just science. I mean,
Yeah.
we as a society and as human beings are disconnected more than ever. And all of these things, getting out of those echo chambers, being willing to listen, having that empathy. You're talking about things that can not only make massive radical change in things that are important to us in the sciences, but also to our society and just being better human beings.
Absolutely. And I feel like you brought up a good point about even just growing up in a community that might be religious, and that is all the
Mhm.
community
Yes.
And that could really just disrupt somebody's entire life if that
Mhm.
means leaving. 'Cause I know people who've left the church or
Yeah.
left, being an Orthodox Jew and leaving that
Mhm.
religion, and how that completely just disrupts everything. And so, and if we don't have, and that's why I think having a supportive, and I know it can be tough sometimes in the scientific world because there is a lot of
Mhm.
territorialism and things of that sort, but having a different sort of community, I guess. I
Yeah.
mean, is that something that could be an answer, or at least help sort of if somebody wants to, because I feel like people might be more apt to be open if they feel like they're not going to have to turn away from something that has been so much a part of their life forever.
But that's belonging.
Yeah.
And again, this applies to everything. We focus so often on this detail or that detail when in reality, what we're describing with so much of what we're trying to do across all these different realms is create a sense of belonging where people feel welcome at the table, to the point that if they have to leave a table they've been at, they have another table they can go to. And again, that requires that we do the work on ourselves as much as it does that we require, that we do work on the outside. We are each of us responsible for creating and maintaining a space that is a place of belonging to other people, and being able to expand, kind of expand our table sometime to at least make space for people who want to learn, for people who are curious about that, can be really impactful.
That's the one thing I feel like science can be better about. And we talked about that, the hubris, and just how can we make science because for each other too,
Right.
a place of belonging for scientists, right? Because I know that sometimes it doesn't feel very
Yeah.
welcoming, right? And it can be
Right.
incredibly toxic
Yeah.
and dare I say unhealthy place
Mhm.
to be. So, if we can create sort of an atmosphere where people feel it's okay to not know everything, because that's another
Mhm.
thing I think our field sometimes, or fields of science, can sort of
Isn't
look
that
down
the
on.
whole purpose of our field, is that we don't know everything?
Right? But like you and I know there are a lot of people, and I've struggled with this too, because I feel like and I know that when I was teaching, students would ask me questions and I would often say,
I
I
don't
don't
know.
know.
No,
Let
let's
me write
figure it
that
out
down.
together.
And I'd put it on science Twitter. I would
Yeah.
literally be like, "Let me put this to science Twitter," because it'd be like a question about like raccoon behavior, and I'm like, "I'm not a raccoon or whatever." And I think there's a power in just saying, "I don't know," that
Right.
lets the students feel like, "Holy crap, my professor doesn't," you know what I mean? Like, it
Yeah.
really does level that playing field. Like,
Mhm.
I'm still learning too, kids. Like, I don't know what the heck's going on. But I feel like if we could be a little bit, again, welcoming that way, or at least better
Right.
that way. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but it's something that I think our fields, or the
Yeah.
fields of science, can be better about. And the
Absolutely.
gatekeeping, obviously we don't want everyone coming in saying I'm an expert, but
Mhm.
at the same time not being as much of gatekeepers or as
Mhm.
prickly as we can be to someone getting it wrong, because sometimes people, try their hand at it and they don't get it right, and that's okay.
But ironically, wasn't it Kuhn that said, new paradigms in science come from failures? And so aren't we supposed to get it wrong so that we can learn the new ways to explain things, to get it as right as we can in this moment with our current understanding? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that's always gotten me, is the whole purpose of what we do is failing gloriously.
Yeah.
Failing gloriously.
Yeah.
And embracing that, not the fact that, oh, we're going to make this great discovery or do this thing, but embracing the ability to fail gloriously, I think, to me, is something that's such a humbling and powerful experience, because it really, my grandmother used to always say, in the grand scheme of things, diddly, just in general. And that wisdom is the point in your life where you realize just how much you really don't know,
Yeah.
that's when you truly become wise. And it's like, we focus so much on how much we know as experts, and sometimes forget that our whole purpose is to fail gloriously, so that we can expand on what we know, not through the, one great discovery or, this amazing paper, but from all the different ways that, our understanding and curiosity was pushed by not getting it right.
Exactly. And we're going to continue making mistakes. And I
Oh,
think that
yeah.
was the big,
I
and
hope so.
yeah, because otherwise we don't have work.
Right.
And I often say, like science I try to tell folks science, think of it more as a verb than a noun. It's a process. It's constantly changing as you gather more data and information, or at least you hope it will, versus those that, say, oh no, it's just fixed and static, kind of like what religion is, right? And
Mhm.
although let's be real, there's been a lot of religious changes through the years because, the Bible's got those ghostwriters and whatnot. And yeah, but good science is going to change. And I wish there was better education that way, just because of, during
Mhm.
COVID, I think that was really hard for people to grasp when Fauci was coming out with new information
Right,
every day. And they're like, why don't they know what they're doing? And it's like, well, no,
right.
they do know what they're doing. And that's
This is
why,
science at its finest. It's called
yeah.
self-correcting.
Hmm. Yep. And we're always going to self-correct. Otherwise, we got ourselves some big problems. Well, what is next for you right now? What do you got going on right now? Tell
Oh,
me.
well, with this being the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial and the 20th of the Kitzmiller versus Dover case, there are a lot of events coming up. So we're actually doing a panel at Evolution 2025, which is in June in Athens, Georgia. So it's the three organization conference highlighting evolution. So you can see the likes and talk to people like Laurie Lebo, the journalist who was incredible in her coverage, Ken Miller, of course, who is famous in his
Yes.
address, and of course, our amazing board president, Brenda Wineapple, who has written on the Scopes trial, Joe Graves. So it's an incredible book group. Rich Katsky, who is one of the attorneys actually for Kitzmiller, and we're reflecting on just the things that we've learned from those two trials and the challenges we're still facing in the U.S. today. There's another event at Vanderbilt actually in July, right around the anniversary time,
Yeah.
that's taking place. So the Evolutionary Studies group at Vanderbilt University is a tremendous group doing work in evolution and also supporting science education. So both of those have teacher events that are free of charge. So share with a teacher you know and love. Or one that that needs some help. Either way, we will take them all. And then, of course, at NABT this year, the National Association of Biology Teachers, we're also going to be there. So you get to hear some incredible stories and meet the people behind a lot of those stories with Kitzmiller as we reflect on the Scopes trial. And then, of course, with climate, I am very excited about our My Coast initiative at NCSE supporting teachers in teaching climate. So we're going to be continuing that in years into the future, bringing teachers around the country to the coastline in their backyard to learn how climate is impacting them. So we do everything that we can, from free resources and webinars and training, and then of course background support if there's something you need to help in fighting back at a school level, district level, state level. It doesn't matter. There is nothing too small for us to give you some support if you need it. But staying busy, monitoring the airwaves and keeping up the good fight.
Gosh, yeah. Every time I talk to you, you're in a different city. It's amazing and
Yeah.
impressive, and I'm tired on your behalf. But no, this is great. I love that how much NCSE does to provide, like you said, free
Mhm.
access
Yeah.
to class plans and things like that.
Mhm.
And I was curious. So you're a nonprofit, which
Yes.
means you take donations. Donate,
Yes.
please. If you're watching, please,
Yes,
please, please consider
please.
donating to National Center of Science
Mhm.
Education to make sure that science stays in the
Yeah.
classroom, right?
Yes, we are 100% donor funded. So
Yes.
we do not have federal grants. We are supported by people who share our passion and fire for the fight for science education. And as you said before, we've been doing this for more than 40 years. And we had the amazing leadership of Jeannie Scott to get us up off the ground. And then Anne Reed helped to sustain our work as things were changing and we got into the climate avenue. And then I get to follow in some pretty amazing footsteps and work with this incredible staff that really works nonstop to monitor and support and engage and investigate all the things going on in science education. So whether you're someone who has a lot to give or somebody who has a couple of bucks that maybe you skip coffee for a month and join us as a sustainer for a few dollars, everything helps and every bit of it is going to the fight for science education across our nation.
This is the perfect thing to donate to. You would be silly not to. that's just me. Yeah, I'm a little biased, a little bit. And just because I'm curious about the process of like when you find a bill or a
Mhm.
resolution that's anti-science, what are the steps that you guys take
Oh,
to
man.
fight this or combat, or what's the word that's advocate for science? There we go.
Well, and it really depends. Glenn, like I said, is an absolute machine. So he identifies things. He watches all of the different pieces that are coming up for consideration. When he identifies something that's a curiosity, he always shares it internally, and we start kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. As far as speaking to his process, sometimes I think that he's really, some futuristic Doctor Who character that's been sent back here to save us. Um, because he does everything
I'd
from
watch that
engaging.
movie.
Yes, he does everything from engaging with the media at critical times to, helping come up with talking points to doing the historical research on what's been done before, where are the histories of these different bills. We have donors, we have members, we have supporters, whether they donate to us or not, who sign up for our newsletter or sign up specifically for the Monitor, which is what highlights and focuses on that legislation. So if you want to be in the know, sign up, go to our website, sign up for the Monitor, and you'll get regular reports on exactly what's happening on the legislative side of things. But it really depends on what's going on, but definitely the ability to keep an eye on from a very early stage, notify major players and stakeholders, being able to organize people on the ground, provide the support that they need to fight back, consistently sending out that information as there are hearings or open floors, open forums, any kind of review and response periods. So again, one man, absolute mystery as to how he's able to do everything that he does, but we sure are thankful he's on our side.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, like I'm not religious, but can we canonize him or bubble wrap him? He needs to be, saved at all costs. We got to keep him healthy.
Yeah, so he may be very unhappy with the bubble wrap idea, but
Okay, is there a sustainable product that can be totally understand. Totally. That is how dedicated he is to science
yes.
and sustainability. I like that. It's a good sign of a good researcher. And wow, I can't thank you enough for all that you do. Seriously. And how do you, I mean, I have a feeling you have a couple ways, but how do you stay hopeful through all this? What sustains you?
Honestly, I know that we can fix things. We've come back from some pretty horrible things in history, and it takes the diligence and the work of of people who are willing to stand up and really speak out. There's a quote by Margaret Mead that stuck with me, and that's the idea that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that ever has. And so, I tell people I just drive the bus for the coolest kids in town because of the people that I get to work with. Paul and Heather in communications for NCSE keep us burning up the airwaves. Deb and Amy keep us going, keep in touch with everybody that's interested in what we're doing. They're the ones that help with programming and planning and get messaging out to people in terms of what we've got going on and how it can be supported. We've got Blake, we've got Wendy, who are literally these incredible science educators. There are science ed specialists that keep things going. Nina has been holding down that office since 1999. I don't know what we do without her. Glenn is our one man wonder who is just always has his finger on the pulse. Stuart keeps us going by making sure we don't crash with all the things that we're doing. And then of course, Astrid keeps us running on the day to day. And I really just cannot say enough about the ability to work with incredible people who are so passionate about what we do that we really, keep feeding each other. Somebody's always going to have like a rough time or a time when we're losing hope because of things happen. And then the rest of the group is there to be able to kind of be like, pull it to the Southern quote, put on your big girl panties and let's get back to work.
Yeah.
You get a few minutes of suffering and there's much to do. But we get to see firsthand, we get to hear firsthand when a student's had an amazing experience or when a teacher has that aha moment, or when somebody goes out and they get to speak in front of their school board and they feel confident and they just really shine. So those are the moments I think that feed me the most, and being surrounded by just this absolutely incredible team, because without them, none of this would be possible. We are small but mighty. There's only 11 of us total, and there's a secret in there that I can't share just yet, but I will in a couple of months.
Ooh.
But we're small but mighty, and we do all of this because we are so in love with making a difference for science, because we recognize how critical scientific thinking and scientific literacy is for all of us.
God, I want it to be contagious. Can we put this feeling in the water?
Yeah, come hang out with us. It
Seriously.
really is contagious. It really is.
Yeah, can we do meet and greets? I feel like you guys need to go on a tour or something. And yeah, I mean that would
Look,
be,
I'd totally be down. If somebody wants to invite us, we'll definitely come visit.
yeah, that's a crew I want to hang out with and get you all around town. I just want to say my unfinished stock says, don't be willfully ignorant of science. Like and share the stream instead. Yes, do that, please. Absolutely.
Yes.
I ask everybody, what is the filthiest thing you have done in the name of science?
Oh, I think you asked me this before. I can't even remember
Yeah.
what I told you.
You might have a new one. I figured it's been a few months. You could come up with something even more dastardly.
Okay, I'll tell you. Most recently, the filthiest thing I've done for science was almost missing my flight in the Atlanta airport and having to take off my sandals that had no strap on them and run to make the flight to work for teachers. So now you'll all know how gross I am. Luckily, no foot fungus or anything happened, but I ran from A terminal to E terminal barefooted through the airport for science teachers in Florida.
Round of applause for you. My goodness. Did you make it?
I made it right as they were shutting the door. So
see, that's
barely.
Science for science. You nailed it. You nailed it. My Lord. You were in step with science.
I wouldn't do much for a Klondike bar, but I would definitely run barefoot through the Atlanta airport for science.
That was
there you go.
Totally awesome. I'm going to use all the bad foot puns, whether people catch them or not. Very bad. No, that's great. No, I've done a ton of really gross and disgusting things, but that's why the show is called Survival of the Filthiest.
Yes.
I feel like sometimes you got to get a little dirty in order to.
I wish mine was more fun than it was, but yeah.
The night is young. That's all I can say. What do you got going on later? I'll be there. I can, if I jump in a car, I'll be in Savannah in
a week.
Probably 3 days. Yeah, I was going to say, you don't know how fast I drive. I'm pretty quick. No, it would take me a hot second. But yeah, I'm hoping to get out there to bring Survival of the Filthiest, the live show out there. And I would love to have you be part of that as the science communicator extraordinaire. As long as you don't mind playing like a gay orca or something like that. Or,
how did you know? I've always wanted to.
I had you wanted to, find your special porpoise. Okay. I've been here all week. Yeah. No, but I'm very excited. And I just love everything that you do. You inspire me and so many others. Anytime I mention your name in science circles, they all light up because you are an absolute joy and you're so good at what you do.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much. And is there ways that people can find you? Obviously, donate to NCSE.
Yes, we are at ncse.ngo. So you can find us, reach us, sign up for newsletters, get free teaching materials, volunteer to help with things, reach out regarding speaking engagements, pretty much one-stop shop. Email if you need help with anything. So everything is at ncse.ngo. Okay,
that's pretty good. And you are on Blue Sky?
I am on everything, yes. But you can find me. I'm still Evo PhD on Blue Sky. I think I managed to still save that. So that's where I'm most engaged.
Yes, come find her. And yes, and please support NCSE. Yes. They do amazing work. And I feel like at this point in time, every form of research is going to be crowdfunded. You know what I mean? Like cancer research.
We're getting there.
Not just your hospital stay, but your actual research for said hospital stay is going to be. So, but definitely please donate to NCSE. And thank you so much for being here. You are an absolute delight.
It's always my pleasure.
Yes, we'll have to. I feel like people want to have you on as often as we can get you on. So if maybe in a couple months we can do another catch up of what the heck's going on with
Absolutely.
the Dr. Amanda L. Townley, because that's what we need.
Absolutely. And just one more thing, you can follow
Yes.
NCSE on every platform. So we're on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, a little bit of everywhere. I'm not going to promise this, but there might be some weird video of me looking like I'm trying to escape a bag full of spiders, aka trying to dance, that comes
Oh,
out on
what?
that TikTok at one time. I've been threatened. The staff has the video, so we'll see. Maybe if there's enough sign up for the newsletter, maybe I can talk them into releasing that gem. But
Do you dance? Do you dance? Are you a dance? No, that you're. Whoa. Okay, that face was.
so okay, just
Go
quick.
on.
I
Yes.
took dance for a great many years and somehow still managed to come out one of the clumsiest human beings on the face of the planet. My children have offered to pay me not to dance at events, so just to manage to salvage some semblance of reputation. So I am not a good dancer at all, but I love dancing. So I'll just leave that there.
Okay, because next time I see you, we are going to dance.
Okay, just leave the camera at home, okay?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, exactly.
Nobody
What
needs to
happens
see
in
that.
Savannah stays there. Yeah, no, we're not here. But escaping a bag of spiders, like I'm hooked. I'm in. I want to know more. So yes, folks, please follow Amanda and NCSE on all the platforms. And NCSE has a great website that kind of keeps you up to date on all the things that they're doing to kind of make sure that science stays in the classroom, because
Yes.
that's where it should be. That on the streets. We want science on the streets
We
too.
want science everywhere. Everywhere is
Everywhere.
for science.
Everywhere.
Everywhere and everyone is for science.
Yes, and I think that what you mentioned earlier, just this idea that everybody should be talking about science. Let's normalize
Yes.
that. Just randomly bringing up weird scientific things on the
Yes.
street, at the water cooler, anywhere and everywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and I
Thank
hope to see
you.
you very soon in person and on
Yes.
tour.
Yes.
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 And folks, just want to let you know that if you liked the show, you can like it, you can subscribe, you can share it with your friends and family, and maybe folks that are not 100% sure how they feel about evolution or
Mhm.
climate change. And if you want to help fund the elaborate production of the show, you can join my Patreon, because we're hoping to create a podcast that's just audio only, so you can listen anywhere and everywhere, and to clip it up so we can get more people sharing these gems of wisdom that we just heard. And so, folks, next week we actually we have a TBD guest. I have a couple of folks that are waiting to hear replies, so we'll get to that hopefully very shortly. And I just want to tell everyone to please stay hopeful, stay positive. I want to thank my producer Peter DeTucker for doing all of that he does, because he makes this show run so smoothly, even when I'm acting like a rabid ferret, which is usually most of the time. And until next time, folks, stay filthy, extra filthy, please. And I want to thank my Patreon. Oh no, I know. The Patreons are coming now. Okay, so patrons, we've got Daniel Wynn, Claude Allen, Simply Tom, Skullbeard, Tori Yates Orr, Redding Maley, Dana Logan, Michael Z. Weinstock, David Leitner, James Hudspeth, Anthony Zana, Tom Berman, Jen Beverstock, Scott Froschauer, JSB, Jeff Cohen, Andrea Bloom, Jonathan Marks, congratulations, Kelly Frazier, and Michael Clanton. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, stay filthy, more filthy, just as filthy as you can be.